What's happening, YouTube? This is Brian916. Thanks for tuning in. As always, guys, welcome back to the channel. And I want to give a big shout out to all my subscribers. So just the other day, I was walking through Lowe's looking for a ceiling fan replacement, and I came across these Colbalt Ratchets. I ended up picking up a 3/8 drive and a 1/4 drive. When I was picking up these ratchets, my wife asked me, do I really need these ratchets? They look pretty similar to some of the ratchets that I have already. So of course, the answer was yes, I do need these ratchets. But that raises the question, why do mechanics have so many ratchets in their tool set? Can you just get away with 1/4 drive ratchet, 1/3/8 drive ratchet, and 1/2 inch drive ratchet of just a standard type? Do we really need all the ratchets that we have? Of course we do. So behind me, I got all my ratchets laid out. I'm going to show you guys all the ratchets that I have and explain why mechanics have so many different ratchets. So let's take a look. All right, guys, so this is my full ratchet collection here. I do have a few Husky ratchets at the house that I get things done around the house with, but for the most part, this is going to be my ratchet collection right here. So that brings us to the question, do mechanics really need all these ratchets? The short answer to that is yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have all these ratchets here. There's a reason why I have all these ratchets. Even all these ratchets laid out, there's still one particular ratchet that I don't have that I need. And I found myself in situations where I wish I had that ratchet and I had to borrow it from Des the Auto Tech. So there is, even all these ratchets laid out here, there's still one ratchet missing out of my collection, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So let me go through and explain why an auto technician would need so many different ratchets. So this long 3/8 drive ratchet here, I use to remove serpentine belts. So this ratchet is long enough to be able to stick this ratchet down far enough past the mechanical fan or past other accessories at the front of the engine, and gives me enough leverage to be able to detension the tensioner so that I can just remove the belt. So not only to just replace the serpentine belt if that's what the job calls for, but many repairs calls for removing the serpentine belt so that you can replace an alternator, or you can replace some kind of pulley that went out, or if you're doing a major engine tear down, a water pump, things like that. The belt has to come off quite often, so you definitely need something to be able to get those belts off, serpentine belts primarily, because they come off quite a bit in auto repair. So we can see that if this particular ratchet was used to try to detension the serpentine belt, it's going to be much more challenging to try to detension a serpentine belt. With this, there's just not a lot of length on it, and I can't get it down past any obstacles that might be in my way. It's not long enough. It's not going to give me the leverage that I need to do it easier, and it may also jam up on a mechanical fan or something else that's in the way. So you can see how different ratchets are extremely necessary. Okay, so that moves us on to this particular ratchet. Here, this is going to be a ratchet made primarily to remove larger fasteners. You can see that the head on this ratchet is a lot bigger because the mechanism inside this ratchet is going to be a lot bigger and a lot stronger to be able to remove larger bolts. So our square drive here is going to be a lot bigger than the ratchet I just showed, which is a 3/8 square drive. And this fits smaller size sockets for the most part, and this is going to fit larger sockets. So you can see the square drives are different size. So this ratchet was built to remove big bolts, okay? And I would break any other ratchet if I try to remove an axle nut with this particular ratchet. This ratchet is going to break. It doesn't have the same length and the same size head on it. It's not strong enough to be able to remove a large bolt. So now I have to buy a ratchet that can remove axle nuts, subframe bolts, or even lug nuts on your tires to be able to tighten or remove lug nuts. So you're going to need a large ratchet, and this also has a flex mechanism to be able to get it in tight spots as well. So you can see the differences right away and why you would need this ratchet. Next to it is going to be Same thing, a 1/2-inch drive built for larger size fasteners, and it has a big head on it and a much larger ratcheting mechanism for big bolts. But notice this one is shorter. So this is going to be primarily used in situations where this may be too long and you can't remove the fastener because this is getting blocked on something inside the engine compartment and you can't use it. Whereas you can put this one in there and you can get a full ratchet going because it's 2 different lengths. So there may be a situation where although this ratchet will be the better ratchet, it's just too long and you can't use it. So you'll have to still use a 1/2-inch ratchet because it is a big bolt, but you're gonna need a shorter length on it. So you get an idea of why we need so many ratchets. Okay, so that brings us to this ratchet. You can see that this ratchet is very slim. It has sort of a wrench profile on it, and you can see this ratchet was made to get into tight spaces. This ratchet was not built for strength to be able to break bolts off and turn hard and stubborn bolts, rusty fasteners and things like that. That's not what this was built for. This ratchet was built to be able to get in tight confinements, to get this ratchet in there and get something due to the size of the head. So if you see how skinny this head is on this 3/8 drive ratchet and you compare it to another 3/8 drive, so you can see that this ratchet has a smaller head diameter than this ratchet to be able to fit it in the tighter spaces. Okay, so that moves us on to this next ratchet. This next ratchet has features on it that maybe some other 3/8 drive ratchets may not have on it. For one, we can see it's got a lot of length on it. Compared to maybe this ratchet here, you can see that it's a lot longer than this ratchet, and it's going to provide more leverage and to be able to get your basic automotive fasteners off pretty easy, which speeds up the repair. The easier it is to remove a fastener, the quicker the job goes. So it has that advantage on it. It has a flex feature on it to be able to get access to fasteners that may be at a slight angle where you can't get it on straight. It also has a release button on here to be able to just press a button and the fastener will drop right off so that you don't have to snatch it off. Whereas some ratchets, you can see it may not have that release button on it. And if you have oily hands, it may make it a lot harder to snatch the socket off when you need to switch to a different size socket. So this ratchet has a lot of different features than some other ratchets. Okay, so that brings us on to the next ratchet. So why do I have this ratchet when this ratchet is pretty similar to the other one? Well, actually there's quite a few differences on this ratchet, and I do use this ratchet for the differences that it has. For one, it doesn't have a release button on it. So if I need to stick this down somewhere tight, I don't have to worry about maybe it hitting the firewall if I'm in a tight confinement and hitting the button and accidentally dropping the socket off, or the frame hitting it somewhere, or some part of the vehicle's anatomy may accidentally hit that release button and the socket falling off. So because of that feature, I would switch to use this ratchet so I don't have to worry about that happening. So you can see the on-off switch or the ratchet left or ratchet right switch is recessed in here and it won't get hit, kind of like the other ratchet. You can see that this ratchet, it sticks out, and in some cases while using it, this switch will accidentally get hit and start reversing the ratchet in a direction that I don't need it to, whereas this one is tucked inside. So every ratchet has different features, and professional mechanics notice these type of features, and that's why we purchase so many ratchets. So that brings us on to the next ratchet. Why purchase this ratchet? Why not just use this ratchet? They're both flexing. Well, again, there's differences. We can see here that this one is a little bit shorter, so it's going to give me access in places where the other ones may hit up on a piece of the vehicle's anatomy and I'm not able to use the other ones. But this one may clear it while I'm ratcheting, and it still provides a flex that I may need, and it's also a locking flex. So that means once I set it in its flex position, it won't move unless I actually move it. So in certain scenarios, a locking flex is pretty mandatory. So that's the purpose of buying this one, to have a locking flex. That brings us to the next ratchet, which is right here. And I mentioned earlier, out of all these ratchets, there's still a ratchet that I need to buy that I don't have in my set, and I find myself needing it. Let me give you an example. So I need a flexing ratchet that's not quite so long. So for example, it would be this ratchet. This is not my ratchet. This is Des, the Autotex ratchet. But I also need a little bit smaller flex head ratchet to be in this set. So I do get in situations where this being my shortest flex head is still a little too long. And however, I still need a flex in that particular scenario, and I need a shorter flexing ratchet. So here would be the ratchet that I'm missing. Even though I have all these ratchets, I still have one ratchet that has not completed my set of ratchets. All right, so that brings us to this ratchet. I use this ratchet, and most technicians use straight ratchets like this that's somewhat long, either for just breaking a fastener loose or for reassembling, to be able to just get a good feel on how tight you're taking a fastener before you stop. So items that aren't critical, having a torque on it is not that critical. Maybe you're installing an alternator or an AC compressor or a power steering pump where the torque is not as critical. These type of ratchets give you a good feel of how tight to take that bolt before you stop. So that's what I primarily use this ratchet for. Do more component disassembly with flex ratchets than I do with straight ratchets. But then again, it also depends on the scenario, because it may be a point in time where even disassembling may be better with the straight. So again, that's the whole point of why we have so many different ratchets. Okay, so that brings us to our next ratchet, which is a Roto Head ratchet. This ratchet has pretty decent length on it, but the advantage to this ratchet is going to be its rotating head. So you can see how this head pretty much rotates all the way around, and you can see how it's going to give you access to different fasteners, or to allow you to use a ratchet somewhat like a screwdriver or a nut driver. Also, you can turn it and use it much like a ratchet for leverage on it. So there's a lot of advantages to using this ratchet. You can see it's a completely different head design than some of the other ratchets that I've just shown. So that moves us to the next ratchet, which is a basic ratchet. This type of ratchet comes with a basic mechanic tool set. This ratchet is not going to be able to get most jobs done. You'll be limited to how much you could get done with this particular ratchet. There's no way you could get like a major engine repair, like an overhaul, maybe a cylinder head job done with just this ratchet. This ratchet will probably break when trying to remove cylinder head bolts and things like that, and you'd have to use other ratchets to complete the job. So it's pretty limited on what you can do, which goes back to why we need so many ratchets. But I do use this ratchet to keep me from putting too much torque maybe on some spark plugs or something if I'm installing spark plugs, whereas a long ratchet like this ratchet has a lot more length on it, and you can end up putting too much torque on it. Or a ratchet this long like this you may end up putting too much torque on something. So a lot of times I'll use a basic ratchet like this just to be able to torque something down that doesn't need a lot of torque, and this kind of prevents me from okay, moving on to this. You can see that this is a completely different drive. The head on this ratchet is a lot smaller, and these particular heads are going to allow you to use much smaller sockets. Which has a small socket this size, you'll be able to use that on a quarter whereas drive. We can see it wouldn't fit on a 3/8 drive. So we definitely need our quarter drives to be able to get small fasteners off in tight locations. Quarter drive is going to be longer than most quarter drives. Here's a standard size quarter drive ratchet, so you can see it's got a lot of length for a quarter drive, much like we demoed on some of these as we went down in size. Same thing on a quarter. You're going to need longer and shorter for different scenarios. All right, guys, moving on down the line, that brings us to this Colbalt Ratchet. So why did I buy this Colbalt Ratchet? What advantages does this Colbalt Ratchet have that the other ratchets don't have? Why couldn't I just use all these ratchets here? Well, if you look at the body on this ratchet, it's actually a lot shorter than a quarter drive ratchet by Snap-on. And also like roughly the same size as your standard 1/4-inch drive ratchet, but if you look, it has a 3/8 drive head on it. So I'm able to put larger sockets on a small ratchet. So you can see the advantages to this, and that's why I picked this ratchet. Okay, moving down the line, we got our Roto Head. I pretty much showed you the advantage of this, but this happens to be a 1/4 drive, so we could do the same thing that we did on that 3/8 drive, but just with smaller sockets. So moving on down the line, got another Roto Head 1/4, and this one's a lot shorter than the other one, and so that's the reason for purchasing that one. You can see that this one's a lot shorter. Also got the same Colbalt Ratchet, but in a 1/4 size. This is actually really small, and that's why I bought this ratchet. It's pretty small. It's probably the second smallest 1/4 drive. On down the line, I have this one, and I actually bought it specifically for this rotating feature on back of the head. So in a lot of cases, when I can get in a situation where I only could put one hand inside, maybe it's a tight reach into something, and I'm only able to get one hand in, when I bust that bolt free, I'll just use this head to rotate the bolt so that I can spin the bolt all the way out and then reach my hand in there and get it out in cases where I can't get two hands in there. So I always keep one of these 1/4 ratchets around specifically for that reason with the rotating head. It's going to be these two stubbies. These are pretty much self-explanatory. These are for clearance issues, so you can stick your hand into a tight area and, you know, ratchet it out, whatever you need to get out. So these stubbies are obviously self-explanatory. Last but not least, we got some palm ratchets here. I don't use these too often, but I do have them if I need them. I think I've only used this 3/8 drive once, where I was thankful that I had it. Never really used the 1/4 one. This thing's probably never really been used, but I do have them in case I need them. I just never found myself in a situation where these have been absolutely mandatory, but I do have them in case I need them. All right, guys, so this is pretty much my whole ratchet collection, and I do use all these ratchets, with maybe the exception of the palm ratchets don't get used too much, but this is pretty much my whole ratchet collection. This is Brian 916. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys on the next one. Alright guys, so I'm heading over to my buddy Wyatt's house. He thinks his alternator went out. It's at the end of the day. I asked Des to come along with me. So we're just gonna run over here before we go home at the end of the day and help a buddy out. His alternator went out, so I brought him an alternator, and so let's see if we can get this thing swapped out. Parks his truck in this alley. Here it is right here.
So I had, like, I thought it was just a battery, and they checked the battery, said it was, like, you know, great, like, you know, like new battery. But then yeah, they tried to charge it, we tried to start it, and he said, you know, like everything that he could see pointed to being the alternator.
Right on.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it appears at least. So
Hey man, I was down in Palm Springs, man. I almost hit your dad up.
You should have.
I almost did it, but I thought he might have been at his other property.
Yeah, he goes back and forth a lot.
It was in the winter time, so if people only go to Palm Springs in the winter, you don't want to go in the summer, you know.
That's what he does. Is he rents it out in the summer, and then he rents out the cabin in Washington for the skiers and stuff.
I figured he might not be there. I was this close to hitting your dad up, man.
He would have loved to see you.
Yeah. Looks like we're gonna have to pull this alternator from the bottom.
Coming out. Careful.
Yeah, I see it.
Alright, got the skid plate back on. Now we can jump the battery. You got it. Alright, so we got a healthy charge going. So we should be good to go. Alright guys, so we threw the alternator in there. Got a nice healthy charge going for my buddy Wyatt. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys on the next one.